What was once a cornfield now sits a sprawling campus known as Redemption Christian Church. In small town rural southern Indiana 23 years ago, an upstart church began with a handful of people, and God has grown it to an impactful church of more than 2,000 with campuses in 3 towns. How did this happen? What did God use to not just make a church grow, but create a movement of Christ followers who are brought into the mission of loving God, loving people, and changing the world? This is the Redemption Story, a series of programs in association with Redemption Christian Church and the Kevin R. Smith Company that attempts to tell a bit of the story of what God has done and is doing at and through Redemption Christian Church. Well, Darrell, we're back for another episode of the Redemption Story, and we've spent a lot of time, you've spent a lot of time, your team that has joined us from time to time, talking about redemption. Mostly the focus has been from that internal aspect, the congregation, the church community. But, talking off camera, you pointed to several things that have occurred in this world outside of the church, unpredictable things that no one ever anticipated. And as we talked, you've identified that as you reflect back, those things have really played a component and part of the launch of what was Christian Church of Jasper at the time, now Redemption, but certainly the growth and the maturation of the church.
Yeah, I think one of the things we've wanted to do in this podcast is also, just tell the story of redemption, but also teach people along the way. We talked about, getting in the Bible and all that. Well, I think one of the things that we can teach is really the sovereignty of God, how He's ultimately in control and He can use all things. You can get into the debate about causation versus, the response and how that works. But He can use all things for His purposes and does. And we see that in the history of redemption. Like, for example, when I felt the nudge and the call to plant here, there was a really big lot of scandal in some of the churches, Main Line and churches going on, and a lot of people had left religion behind, and they were kind of deconstructing their faith, as happens consistently in cycles throughout history, and so there was a time when we started at Redemption CCJ at the time. There was a lot of that going on. A lot of people who just were not in church; they're unchurched. And I called them de-churched because it's not that they had never been the church. They were raised with the faith, but things had happened, and Grandma's faith didn't necessarily transition to be their faith, and they were looking for something different and something more. And about that time, we come along, and our whole purpose, as you know, is to just, love God, love people, and change the world. And you do that by just making it about Jesus and His mission. And getting people to Him and wrecking the roof to get people to Him and all those things. And so I think we started at just the right time, and the rise of, I've been a part of non-denominational, an independent church for my entire life, but it became a very good time to be a part of that. And so we started attracting people looking for that kind of, a different kind of church maybe. And then we probably were a little more than a year old, and maybe a year and a half old, and we had finally got a building, a facility. We'd been meeting in the theater, and we went we bought this warehouse on Cathy Lane, and this thing that almost everybody who was alive at that point remembers where they are and what they were doing. 9/11 happened. And I remember watching, I was substitute teaching at Springs Valley School, and actually the Family Consumer Science Department, what we used to call home ec, I think, back in the day. I was substituting there, and I had the computer screen. I saw what happened. I started watching, and I get a call a little while later, and it was from someone who worked they were from the Valley, but they worked in Jasper, in one of the banks here, and they were just looking for a place to go pray, a church to go pray, because everybody was kind of, and so I made some phone calls, and we unlocked the doors, and they just went there and prayed, and that began this kind of, I think, this turn for a lot of people back to God, and I think we were open and had our facility and had our doors and had our base there for when that happened. And I think it played a part in our growth and the type of response we have in the community. I remember pulling out my sermon that was already done at that point. I pulled out that sermon, and I don't even have to change much on this. Like, the sermon that God had kind of led me to was fitting for the response that we needed, the comfort, the faith, pep talk, all those kind of things. It just fell into place. And so I began to think, you know what? I don't know what I'm doing half the time, but God always knows what He's doing. And sometimes He uses my not knowing what I'm doing to do what He's doing. And so you see that throughout the history of the church. We start growing, we relocate. The nation's going through a real change at the time where we are in 2 wars and people are bogged down, and there's kind of this economic downturn, and there's the rise of a political leader and who become kind of a historical president in terms of the first African American to be president, Barack Obama. And so you see, again, we have moved to our new location. Our doors are open. The church is, the nation is going through things. Some people are turning away from God. Other people are turning to God. Here we are. We have the place, and we have the real hope. And so the whole conversation was about hope for America. And I'm like, you know what? That's all fine and dandy, but we want real hope in Jesus Christ that will outlast the United States of America. And so we just had this opportunity to just dive in and use what's going on in our world and our culture. God used it to bring people to us and to put us the right place, the right time. And that happened on the local level, and it happened. I think about churches going through things, and people looking for something different. I think about unchurched people and how we were an alternative. There had never been a church like us in this area. Not that there was anything wrong with some of the churches there. They're fine. They're reaching people. But we could reach a different kind of people. We always say be different in order to reach somebody different. And so the timing of everything, that's kind of the way it worked out. And it just began to help me think, you know what, God uses even the crazy things going on in the world, culturally, world affairs, economically, all that, to help build His church.
You used the word timing, and September 11th, 2001, for those of us, to your point, we all remember where we were. I know I certainly do. When at that point there were pagers, and for those youth today, pagers are these small little devices. They would buzz on your belt side, and there would be a message saying, call this number or something. And that wasn't me, but you kind of get that, hey, something's going on type thing. But you mentioned timing. And September 11th certainly seemed to be an awakening time that none of us expected. Well, I shouldn't say none of us, but those of us walking in Jasper, Indiana, French Lick, Indiana, just about our daily lives went to work that day thinking of those things. The use of timing, sometimes it catches us in the natural because we try to control timing. Sometimes it catches us when it really opens the door to, you know what, I really have been searching, but I didn't realize I was searching.
Absolutely. Yeah, that people are always searching. The old country song, looking for love in all the wrong places. People are looking for purpose and love and all that, but sometimes you're just not looking in the right place. And sometimes those events then point them to the right place. And there's so many things that changed during that era. I believe that was the rise of the worship culture. Prior to that time, the songs we sang in church, most people hadn't heard because you just didn't listen to Christian radio, and Christian radio didn't have worship music. You had other types of music. Well, there was a turn in our country at that point, and you could say for better or for worse, where a lot of the Christian music that was recorded was worship music, and that became the popular music culture of the Christian community. And so it does change then, even then inside the church. So now there are people come to church that know all these songs. And it was kind of interesting to see that shift. But all that kind of coming from a world event, or of an event in our country. Really, it felt like it was next door, even though it was 10 hours away. In the East Coast. So yeah, absolutely.
And there are many ways that one day in September 2001 that there are still impacts of that being felt today,
Very
whether
much
it's
so.
in health situations, lawmaker, legal aspects, but also just in protecting our country. And,
Yeah.
just going back prior to that, you could walk anywhere in the airport you wanted to.
Yeah, so 2001, the summer 2001, we went on a mission trip to Haiti, and people literally walked with us all the way to the gate. I mean, that's what you did back then. They told us buy from the gate. We get on the plane. Well, post September 11th, that obviously never happened again. And so it changes so many things that just continue on. But now it seems so normal that you don't think about it. But that all changed back then. And I think there's probably so many things about the church that changed around then, and we don't even realize it.
Well, we're talking about the September 11th, 2001 tragedy that happened in our country, in our world. But you've also alluded to maybe, I hate to use the term smaller events or aspects, but economic downturns. It was after 2001, the automotive industry underwent a major change, for lack of a better word. Today, we see in countries where I know the church has invested time, and you talked about serving with missions, to where there's some unrest. Recently a Missouri lawmaker lost his daughter and her husband in a unprovoked attack in any way, shape, or form. Those things and aspects play on members of our congregation here as they do members of other churches.
Yeah, and from what I understand, I don't know this for sure, but that couple went to one of our Bible colleges that we support. We've sent students to Ozark Christian College, so yeah, it does. It really plays effect in our lives and around the world, and certainly And I was talking with Leon d'Orleans, who's our missionary to Haiti, and we were talking about, well, they were in a country that wasn't safe. Should they have been out? And he's like, if you feel called to be somewhere, you're not thinking about, well, I shouldn't be here because I'm going to die here, because you feel you're there for that purpose. And if you do, then it's, for God will use it for His glory. And we don't think about that when we think about, Christian persecution. Oh yeah, sure, go in there in the Arab world countries that are hostile towards Christianity in your life. But we think, well, if you're going to countries that are more friendly towards that, then why risk your life? Well, you're still doing God's work. So yeah, absolutely. And we see world events, hostility towards Christianity, I think, is probably, I mean, you look at in history, it's been big, and it's always been big in certain parts of the world. I think the Western Hemisphere, it's growing. I think while we haven't reached persecution levels, I do believe there's levels where we're being, people are trying to minimize the Christian message and the Christian life. I believe there are some prejudices and some discrimination that will eventually probably give way to full-blown persecution. And the key is to just keep feeding that faith in you and growing fanning that flame of faith, so as such, when you're faced with those times, you'll stand for what's right and you stand for Jesus, no matter the cost.
Just as God places people in our lives that maybe we don't understand why, He puts those places in our lives in the same aspect.
Absolutely. And didn't the writers of the Bible, Paul in particular, consider a privilege that they would be put in those circumstances? What an honor to be more like Christ, to put your life on the line. And so you just see all the time the way world events and cultural events, God uses them. And and what Satan intends for evil, God uses for good.
Well, Daryl, great message.
Thank you.
Great topic. Let's build on this a bit in our next episode, perhaps for our viewers and listeners, and maybe we can talk about where the church still feels that impact today. What can you place? What can we look at the church today and directly point back to those things around us in this world?
Okay.
Thank you for joining.
Yeah.
God bless.
See you next week.